There are a number of different decisions that authors must make before they start writing their books, and one of these is which point of view to write from. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about 4 different points of view, or 5, depending on how you look at it, as well as some considerations and uses of each. And hopefully by the end of today's video, you'll have a better understanding of the point of view and how to use it in your story. Hello and welcome to the Mythic Quill. I'm Leclerc. Before we get into today's video, I just want to mention that point of view, as I'm talking about it today, is not the same thing as point of view character. So if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for information on point of view character, that will be the next video I post. And once it is live on YouTube, I will post a link here. Today what we're talking about is first person, second person, or third person. And the reason I said there's possibly 5 points of view is because we have first person with a reliable narrator, first person with an unreliable narrator, second person, third person omniscient, and third person limited. So that's 5 possible viewpoints to write from. First person, and I'll start from a language teacher point of view. First person personal pronouns are I or we. So that means if you see the words I, me, mine, we, us, our, ours, so you're looking at the first person. The first person point of view is the closest point of view. And in writing, when we talk about distance, like closest and furthest, we're talking about how easy it is for the reader to get pulled into the story. So for the first person, we're using those pronouns I, me, my, mine. So it's easy for the reader to feel like they're in the character's shoes, to kind of put themselves into the story that way. While the first person point of view is the closest point of view, it's also the narrowest. So that means it's very limited and it can be biased because you're only getting the actions, thoughts, and feelings of that one character, that main character. And this is where we get into the reliable versus unreliable narrator. But how do you know, for example, if the main character, the protagonist, is seeing things clearly? If you read the book Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn or watched the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. There are 2 narrators in that story, and pretty much both are biased. So we have a first-person narrator in the form of the journal, and the other first-person narrator who's telling the story themselves. Okay, the next point of view I want to talk about is the second person. The second person singular personal pronoun is you, and the plural is the same one, you. So if you see words like you, your, yours, then you know you're looking at the second person point of view. Now, the second person point of view is popular in non-fiction books, but it's very rare in fiction. And in fact, if you were to talk to a writing coach or a writing instructor, they would tell you probably to stay away from the second person. It is considered quirky and awkward, and it doesn't normally work well. The few times I heard people talking about a second person point of view story that actually worked in fiction, they were all talking about the same book, which is J. McInerney's Bright Lights, Big City. So if you were tempted to use a second person point of view, you might have editors telling you, don't use it, it's awkward, writing coaches, agents telling you to stay away from it. But if you do use it, you also stand the chance of being accused of trying to be a J. McInerney knockoff. So if you're a new author or an author of fiction, try to avoid the second person point of view, unless of course you're writing nonfiction, because it works really well in nonfiction. The next point of view I want to talk about is third person omniscient. So for third person, of course, you're looking at the pronouns he, she, and they. So if you see he, him, his, she, her, hers, they, their, theirs, any of those pronouns, you know you're looking at the third person. And there are 2 types of third person narrative that you can see. And the first one is third person omniscient. It's called third person omniscient because the narrator is not actually in the story. It's like they're standing back from the story and they can see everything that's going on. They know what every person's thinking and they know whatever's going on anywhere at any given time. Now it was used a lot back in the times of, say, J.R. Tolkien. And a lot of the classic books that I read, like in university, a lot of them use the third person omniscient. But it is the farthest point of view. And sometimes it can be very hard for readers to get into a third person omniscient book. You're not looking at from anybody's point of view in particular, you're just looking at the narrative from afar. And books that are written in third person omniscient also have a tendency to lean towards exposition, which is you're doing more telling than showing. So for example, J.R.R. Tolkien used third-person omniscient in a lot of his writing, such as The Lord of the Rings. But these days, authors are not being recommended to use third-person omniscient because it is that farthest viewpoint, and it's hard for readers to actually feel like they're in the midst of the story with that kind of distance. And also, it's really difficult to do third-person omniscient really well. Obviously, the next one is third-person limited. So third-person limited, you're still using the third person, he, she, they, but this time there's only one or two or maybe a few viewpoint characters. So that means you can't see everything. You can only see what your viewpoint characters see. So it's almost treated like first person, but with the third person pronouns. And here's where it can potentially get as close as the first person. It is possible in third person limited to go so close that you're diving into the thoughts and emotions of the narrator. In which case, like I said, you're kind of dragging the reader into the story with you, and they can feel like they're in that person's shoes, even though you're still using he or she. Some authors will use third person point of view as in you can only see and experience what that character is seeing and experiencing, but you don't necessarily get into their heads. And like I said, on the other extreme of that is the authors who write it almost like it's first person. You get the thoughts and feelings, but you're still using the third person pronouns. The reason I was going from third person omniscient to third person limited is I've heard it said that George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones books are third person omniscient, but with multiple point of views. So his books, in my opinion, are somewhere between third person omniscient and third person limited, because he is using viewpoint characters. It's just he happens to have a lot of viewpoint characters because it's a big story, right? So here's some tips for using any point of view effectively. First of all, choose your point of view before you write. If you want to play around to see which one feels best for your story and you're not actually into your story yet, that's fine, because you're going to want to feel which one feels more natural for you and which one feels like it's going to work best for your story. Also, introduce that point of view as soon as possible and be consistent throughout. So if you start writing in the first person narrative, you're going to keep that first person narrative all through the story. You're not going to switch. That being said, I do know some authors have used dual point of view, and the main character used first person and the other point of view character used third person. And that's okay if you do it consistently throughout the book, but I would suggest, especially if you're a new author, just pick one and stick with it all the way through. One way to decide which point of view is right for your book is to think about which one feels more natural for your story. Like I said, the first person is a very close point of view. So if you're okay with one point of view character or maybe a dual point of view characters, and you want your readers to be close, to be able to immerse themselves in the story, then you can use a first person. So it does seem to be a thing in romance these days that first person narrative with dual point of view characters is used. But like I said, you kind of have to judge. Third person is used a lot for fantasy. And that's my two big genres that I read are fantasy, romance, and those books that kind of ride the line between fantasy and romance, so fantasy romance books. So for romance books, for example, first person narrative works really well, although I have seen some romance books written in third person narrative and they use it very effectively. Fantasy is often written in third person limited these days. And you know, the thing is, I know some fantasy writers who start writing in third person omniscient, and then what happens is the editor will accuse them of head hopping. And head hopping is like if you're in one scene and you're jumping from one person's thoughts to another, which should be okay in third person omniscient. But the problem with that is that it can pull your reader out of the story, because sometimes it gets hard to follow when you're jumping around like that. So these days, I think a lot of editors and agents and writing coaches will tell you to use third person limited instead of third person omniscient. That's all I have to say today about point of view in writing. If you have any questions or comments, any information you would like to add, just put it in the comment section below. If you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up. And if you like this content and you would like to see more like it, then hit the subscribe button. And if you hit the bell icon, you'll be notified right away when my next video is posted. Thank you, and see you next time.